Let's conclude this discussion on Paris Agreement with a few more points. Here it is showing public sector spending on energy-related research, development, and demonstration. RD&D, usually we talk about R&D, but in these kind of systems, demonstration is very important, especially in terms of scalability of things. Whatever works in the lab, unless it can be done at large scales, it's not going to have substantial impact on emissions and climate change, right? So of course, the bad news is that the annual cumulative dollars in billions of US dollars, 2014 prices and power parity, power of parity purchasing or some measure here. So you can see the cross-cutting technologies, nuclear and energy efficiency measures, fossil fuel-based solutions and renewables. The investments had dropped off till even recently as 2005 or so, and fortunately there is an uptick and there is a little bit of a bump here that is related to, I think, coming out of the financial crisis and the collapse of the auto industry. Sorry. And so on. But the trend is still here not very encouraging. It's not headed up necessarily. It's still either having a secular drop or hopefully it'll come back with new president in the US and maybe potentially new leadership on the international stage. Okay. This again raises the question of what drives innovation. Is it always just capitalism and making money? Or is innovation a public good? Again, it's incredibly humid here in Mumbai because of the low pressure system that's churning in humid air, I suspect. Anyway, the COVID-19 has reminded us that innovation is in fact a public good, right? The companies were funded to go after vaccine development, and vaccine development processes often take many years and even more than a decade. But several vaccine candidates have lined up now with human trials and even seeking approvals for large-scale vaccination of people. UK is getting ready to do it. US will do it. India wants to do it. China obviously is probably already doing it, and so on and so forth. So, is that a good news? Yes, I think it was a global crisis which showed many things as to how climate action can take a backseat when another crisis explodes, like COVID at global scale, or how it happened at local scale for Japan with the Fukushima disaster, or financial crisis in the US and Europe, and so on and so forth. Okay. Nonetheless, Paris Agreement has something in it called Mission Innovation, a global initiative working to accelerate clean energy innovation. So it has a goal of accelerating pace of clean energy innovation to achieve performance breakthroughs and cost reductions to provide widely affordable and reliable clean energy solutions. So this is innovation for public good. 25 members launched at COP21 in 2015. Mission Innovation members represent about 80% of the global government investments in clean energy RD&D. Okay, so you have to keep this in mind. Where are the investments and whether that's sufficient, and the intention of driving mission innovation. As you can see, MI used to be Mission Impossible for Tom Cruise, or the old one, but now it's Mission Innovation. And there are the objectives. I won't go through all of them, but you can see the idea is that the increased investment and increased innovation is going to lead to better solutions, lower costs, and more uptake. So you have a built-in action enhancement or self-reinforcement mechanism that is envisioned here. And the innovation challenges remain global collaboration to accelerate innovation in key technology areas, smart grids, converting sunlight in terms of intermittency, off-grid access, clean energy materials, carbon capture. CCS is not going to go away anytime soon. Affordable heating and cooling of buildings. Buildings, transportation remain high targets. Sustainable biofuels. There are lots of issues there in terms of bioenergy and competition with food, grain supply and food prices, especially for poor people, or deforestation for growing palm oil like in Indonesia and so on and so forth. Renewable and clean energy, clean hydrogen. Okay. 19 mission innovation champions, 6 major collaborators. So these are the ones listed here. So again, another good news if it works. Leadership. We have said already several times that leadership is just completely missing in climate action. EU does a lot of things at EU level, but somehow hasn't stepped up or doesn't have the credibility at global level. Individual countries do invest in many climate activities outside, like Norway, Sweden, I think Germany, and so on, but there is no global leadership. We looked at California in the last chapter as a living example of creating this California effect, which is affecting other states in the US. Can it go beyond? Can California create a followership based on its actions that say we want to be like the Golden State? Okay, so here is the picture we have seen already. California's total greenhouse gas emissions in million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year, historically where it was and where it is, and some trajectory uptick here which has to be watched for in terms of business as usual going beyond 2020. 2020 target has already been met, as we saw. 2030 target and 2050 targets are very ambitious, and California is blessed with good climate and wealth, fifth largest country. So what it does will, fifth largest economy, what it does can and will matter if it can also begin to reflect its lessons outside and create a followership. Okay. To summarize the chapter, failure to make progress on climate problem is the result of many factors that we looked at, and each of which on their own could spell failure for international cooperation. So the structure of the climate change problem itself makes it hard to have effective national politics because costs of action are visible and upfront, but the benefits are diffused far into the future and global. This works even at individual levels. As I've said many times in this course, parents are very happy to save for the college fund for their children, but not so clear on how to pay for clean environment for their children. There are many different strategies for achieving cooperation, but the central challenge is creating a deep collaboration. That is, cooperation in which parties do more to address a global public good, like protecting the atmosphere, than they would if they evaluated costs and benefits with reference to just themselves. So if you're just looking at air quality here and not over there, how much will you do? The most important types of cooperation for climate change are those that create large joint gains and are not self-enforcing. As a general rule, self-enforcing agreements in climate area have not evolved much major change in behavior. Okay, so the history of climate diplomacy involves many agreements that are largely self-enforcing but have little impact on emissions. So something is missing in terms of busy negotiations every year for 25 years with nothing to show for it in terms of global emissions. Paris Agreement may prove to be quite different because it sets up a process that requires countries to set their own commitments, pledges known as NDCs we talked about, according to what they are willing to and able to achieve. That process, in theory, allows more flexibility and can encourage greater experimentation. So if you see benefits, you might go way beyond your NDC and do more. That self-enforcing is really needed. While promising, the Paris process left many key elements incomplete. Particularly important is a mechanism for checking on the quality and content of the national pledges, the NDCs, so that transparency is really lacking. The engine for progress under Paris Agreement will be leadership by jurisdictions that have a strong incentive or inclination to lead. The strategy of leadership requires a strategy of followership, since most of the world's emissions come from jurisdictions that won't be leaders. So, can a country like India or China take local regional leadership and play the game completely differently than they have been? The distrust, the geopolitics, the tinkering in the countries to manipulate, whether it's economically motivated or territorially motivated. There are evidences of some excess activities that can actually hurt coordination, let alone cooperation and collaboration. So if they can grow regionally, then they can become global and create followership as well. So this is something to be watched for very carefully, and let's hope for the best.